Ukraine just unleashed something massive on Moscow. The largest drone attack of the year is complete and Russia is up in flames. Oil is burning, Russia's capital is under siege, and for Putin this means that the Russian people he has been trying to protect in his country's most important city have just gotten a massive dose of the reality of war. The Moscow Times has the details. On March 16th, it reported that the weekend had seen Ukraine unleash a multi-day barrage of drones at the Russian capital, which has amounted to one of the largest seen since the beginning of the war. The attacks have continued into March 16th, according to Moscow's mayor Sergei Sobyanin, and they show that Ukraine has flipped the switch and decided that Russia's capital is fair game. Of course, Sobyanin makes the same claim that Russia always makes when faced with Ukraine's drones, which is that air defenses have destroyed everything. However, it's the sheer numbers in the swarms that Ukraine has unleashed that pack the biggest punch here. Over the past 2 days, air defense forces have destroyed approximately 250 enemy UAVs on approach to Moscow, and at the second line of approach, Moscow's mayor said in a Telegram post. What we see here is Ukraine taking the gloves off while showing Putin and his Kremlin cronies that Moscow, which is the one city that Putin wants to protect ahead of all others in Russia, is within Ukraine's range and can be hit. The sheer psychological trauma being brought on by Ukraine's escalating aerial strategy could be enough to pressure Putin into pulling the plug on his invasion, as we'll cover when we get deeper into the video. But before we get to that, it's worth exploring the sheer scale of Ukraine's Moscow attack. This isn't the first time that Ukraine has launched drones at Moscow. Back in March 2025, almost a year to the day before Ukraine unleashed its record-breaking drone assault, Ukraine had tried something similar in Moscow. That attack saw 91 of Ukraine's drones get shot down in and around Russia's capital city, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, and it led to 3 people dying. There are no casualties reported for Ukraine's latest attack, at least not yet, but eyewitnesses at the scene have reported plenty of explosions, and Ukraine has forced the closure of airports all across the Moscow region. The Kyiv Post reports that people on the ground have claimed to have seen explosions in Moscow's Troitsky administrative district, along with Podolsk, Domodedovo, Dubna, Mozhaisk, Istra, Solnechegorsk, and Narofominsk have all come under fire as Ukraine rattles off drones almost indiscriminately at Russia's capital city and surrounding regions. Then there are the airport closures. Rosaviatskaya, which is Russia's aviation authority, has imposed flight restrictions on several of Russia's airports in response to Ukraine's enormous drone attack. Vnukovo, Domodedovo, Zhukovsky, and Sheremetyevo airports have all seen flights get cancelled or delayed, and only Vnukovo has managed to return to a point where it can operate normally. All the rest of these airports are dispatching flights in coordination with relative authorities, Kyiv Post reports. Airport closures aren't the only problem affecting Russia right now. Far away from Moscow, oil is burning. We'll reveal where in just a few minutes, but don't underestimate how important it is for Ukraine to close down Moscow's airports. Every airport closure leads to delayed or cancelled flights, which in turn can leave thousands of Russian travelers stranded in airports. Psychologically, this is as surefire a sign as any that Ukraine's drones are reaching Russian territory. No matter how hard Putin works to suppress the evidence of drone strikes, which is one of the driving forces behind the Kremlin shutting down access to Telegram, flights being halted for safety reasons sends a clear message. Ukraine's drones are in the skies. Flight cancellations also lead to ticket refunds, which snatch income out of the Kremlin's pocket. We saw something similar in July 2025 when a mass drone attack on 10 of Russia's cities led to 2,000 flights being delayed and another 485 being cancelled. Around 43,000 tickets had to be refunded as a result of these issues, and that's a lot of taxable income being put back into the pocket of Russian citizens that the Kremlin can't get its hands on. So every strike that shuts down airports is a strike that costs Putin's war machine monetarily, as well as a strike that stabs into the heart of the propaganda that the Kremlin tries to force down the collective throats of the Russian people. There's another interesting wrinkle to this story. Per the Kyiv Post, according to the Russian military blogging Telegram channel SHOT, Ukraine used FP-1 drones in the attacks on Moscow. Ukraine reportedly launched these drones in waves of 8 to 10 units at a time. Each of these drones is capable of carrying up to 60 kilograms or 132 pounds of explosives and can travel for up to 1,400 kilometers or 869 miles, placing Moscow well within their range. These drones are fairly new additions to the aerial aspect of the Ukraine war. The FP-1 was unveiled in May 2025, though it was reported to be capable of carrying an explosive twice the size that the Kyiv Post claims, as well as being able to travel 200 kilometers or 124 miles further. Militani says that Ukraine was already producing the drones in large numbers by May and that they had been used to conduct several attacks on Russia. Fast forward to November, and the new Voice of Ukraine also reported on the FP-1. highlighting it as a drone that's capable of reshaping Ukraine's entire long-range strategy. The FP1 is the cheapest and most efficient drone in its class, the drone's manufacturer, Firepoint, said at the time. And with a low cost comes the ability to launch massive swarms of these drones, which is precisely what we're seeing in Moscow right now. With the FP1, Ukraine has a cheap drone that it can use to overwhelm Russia's air defenses. Though the Moscow attack doesn't appear to have borne any fruit yet, at least none that's being reported, what Ukraine has here is a strike that delivers a clear warning to Putin. When combined with Ukraine's drone missile hybrids such as the Flamingo, the FP1 could be a drone that Ukraine can use to clear a path through Moscow's air defenses, allowing for devastating strikes against Russia's capital. We say that no fruit appears to have come from one of the largest strikes against Moscow that we've seen so far in the war. The reality is that we don't really know anything beyond the scraps of information that the Russian authorities have delivered. They claim no casualties and around 250 drones shot down. But Ukraine is keeping quiet, and Moscow has made some moves during these strikes that indicate that it's desperately trying to maintain control over the narrative. Take the Telegram shutdowns we mentioned earlier. The Moscow Times reports that the same weekend that saw Ukraine unleash its barrage of FP1s also saw people all across Russia lose access to Telegram. A full crackdown is being anticipated in April, which could spell the end of the social media app in Russia. But this latest outage coinciding with Ukraine's attack indicates that the Kremlin is jumping the gun, perhaps to prevent news and footage of the strikes against Moscow from circulating. Telegram has basically stopped working for many Russians who don't use virtual private networks, the Moscow Times reports. And that loss of Telegram isn't the only indicator that Russia is trying to hide something. As the Kyiv Post reported on March 15th, what amounts to a digital blackout has also settled over Moscow and St. Petersburg over the last couple of days. This blackout appears to have been instigated by the Kremlin and has cut 19 million people off from mobile internet services. There are rumblings that this has something to do with a coup plot created as Putin slashes away at Russia's defense ministry with cuts. But what it all amounts to is Russia going out of its way to take the tools that its own people can use to report on the success, or otherwise, of Ukraine's record-breaking drone attacks against Moscow. This is suppression of evidence. Suppression of reporting, or Russia's people, and of the truth that Putin so desperately wants to keep contained. But for as hard as the Kremlin works to hold together its narrative in Moscow, another region of Russia is providing plenty of evidence that Ukraine's drones are striking their targets. We'll tell you what that region is and what happened in a moment. But before we do, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you want more insight like this, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you never miss a video. As Moscow goes offline and the drones keep flying, there are big problems for Russia in Krasnodar. Located about 1,300 kilometers or a little over 800 miles south of Moscow, that city is the capital of Russia's Krasnodar Krai region and is less than 100 miles away from the Black Sea. That positioning matters because it means that Krasnodar is a prime target for Ukraine's drones and missiles. Add the fact that the region is also home to oil depots that Russia uses as part of its logistical network that funnels fuel and supplies into occupied Ukraine. Based on that, can you guess what Ukraine struck during the same weekend that it sent 250 drones hurtling toward Moscow? If you said Russian oil, you're right on the money. During the early hours of March 16th, Ukraine unleashed a massive drone strike against Krasnodar Krai, hitting a local oil depot in the process. Initial reports of the explosions in the city started popping up at about 2 a.m. local time, and it wasn't long before the evidence of Ukraine's success had mounted to the point where Russian authorities weren't able to pretend that oil wasn't burning in the city. Taking to Telegram in the wake of Ukraine's strike, the Krasnodar Krai emergency response team reported a drone attack caused a fire at an oil depot in the Lubinsk industrial zone. According to preliminary information, there are no casualties. There may not have been casualties, but there was plenty of fire. Exilanova Plus proved that with its own Telegram post, where it shared several videos of the aftermath of Ukraine's strike. Each one shows a massive fire at the Lubinsk industrial zone, which only seems to be growing in intensity as you cycle through the videos. Ukraine hasn't commented on this attack yet, though it's pretty clear from all of the reports that it unleashed its drones against the oil depot. As for Russia, beyond the comments made by the Krasnodar emergency team, we've seen the excuse that we've heard trotted out by Russian authorities so many times before. This wasn't Ukraine scoring a direct hit with its long-range drones. Oh no, Russia's air defenses were so effective that they destroyed all of the drones over Krasnodar, and it just so happens that debris from those drones fell onto the oil depot with such explosive force that it caused the entire depot to go up in flames so massive that they can be seen from an enormous distance away. Is anybody starting to get a feeling of déjà vu in Russia's reporting of Ukraine's drone strikes? It seems that every time it's debris that does the damage and not the drones themselves. At this point, it's starting to feel like Russia's energy and military infrastructure is so fragile that it can be set ablaze if you throw a rock at a depot. We're being facetious. What really happened is that the world's most accurate drone debris struck again. It just happened to be debris that was still connected to a drone because Russia's air defenses utterly failed to shoot that drone out of the sky. The Kyiv Independent adds more, noting that Krasnodar Krai has been a constant target for Ukraine over the last week. On March 15th, Ukraine also hit the Tikhoret oil pumping station in the region, which serves as one of the region's key oil transit points. Again, photographs started circulating on social media, including one shared by Excelenova Plus, that shows the facility in flames. And to rub salt in the Russian wounds, this March 15th strike came on the back of a March 12th attack against the same facility. Plus, Ukraine also pulled off a strike against the Efipsky oil refinery at around the same time. Anybody would think that Russia has no air defenses in Krasnodar Krai. Maybe it doesn't. But as the Kremlin scrambles to keep information from flowing out of Moscow in the wake of one of Ukraine's largest ever attacks against that city, it seems to be failing to keep up with what Ukraine is doing about 800 miles away. Krasnodar Krai and its oil are burning, and Russia has failed to keep a lid on what Ukraine is doing in that region. Krasnodar and Moscow are two very different cities that have suffered a deluge of drone destruction over the past few days. And each of these Ukrainian strikes has done something different, though they ultimately serve the same purpose of crippling the Russian war machine. Sticking with Krasnodar Krai for a moment, and we'll come back to Moscow soon, what we've seen here is the continuation of a strategy that Ukraine accelerated in 2025. By taking out as much of Russia's oil as possible, you weaken Putin's forces on the front lines and strip away a key resource that the Kremlin uses to make money. The specific facilities that Ukraine hit in Krasnodar Krai are key in terms of frontline supplies, as the Kyiv Post explains. The Krasnodar Krai territory is considered a strategic logistics hub for the Russian army. Oil depots in the region serve as gas stations for Russian troops fighting in southern Ukraine, the outlet claims. Ukraine's logic here is pretty simple. If you destroy the gas stations, you take the Russian fuel out at the source. What this means is that tanks, armored vehicles, and everything else that Russia has in Ukraine that need fuel aren't getting it. Mechanized assaults become infantry assaults because the mechanized portion can't move anymore. And even when it comes to mobile air defenses and artillery, Russia can't do much with them because the flow of oil has been halted. They have to stay where they are, and if Ukraine happens to know where these assets are, yet more drones will be coming to meet them as they're stuck with no fuel. We also can't underestimate the importance of attacks on Krasnodar Krai's oil from a revenue perspective. Burning oil can't be sold to other countries. Ukraine realized that long ago, and its attacks against Russian oil have caused a consistent decline in the amount of revenue that Russia can derive from its most valuable product. Operation Epic Fury in Iran has been a boon for Russia in this regard, with the Financial Times reporting that Russia is making an extra $150 million per day from its oil, in the wake of oil prices rocketing up due to Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. But that's a short-term salve for Putin's oil problems, and it's likely no coincidence that Ukraine has been hitting one of Russia's key oil terminals over and over as the war in Iran goes on. Taking out oil now means that Putin can't profit from it, nor can his soldiers use it in their invasion of Ukraine. And so we come back to the 250 drones sent in the direction of Moscow. The impact of these drones is measured less in the physical damage that they've caused, and more in the psychological impact that these attacks have had on the residents of Moscow. Long-range strikes are the best security guarantee that Ukraine has against Russia, the Atlantic Council said in January. What this means is that Ukraine proving that it's able to send its drones and missiles so deep into Russia that they can target places like Moscow serves as a clear message to anybody who has bought into Putin's claims that Ukraine is out of the fight. Ukraine is still very much alive, and its strikes are getting deeper. People in Moscow are seeing that right now. As much as the Kremlin might try to hide what's happening with its internet and social media crackdowns, it can't do much about airports being shut down and flights being cancelled en masse. One or two cancellations can be explained away, but dozens, all over the same weekend, have a reason behind them, and even the Russians who only pay attention to state media will be able to figure out that such crazy circumstances only happen because of Ukraine's drones. Ukraine is bringing the war that Putin started back home to Russia. Granted, it's been doing that for a long time, however, Ukraine rarely targets Moscow, at least in comparison to the border regions and the far-flung, poorly protected regions of Russia that Putin doesn't value as much as the capital. Ukraine's FP-1 drones, which reportedly cost about $55,000 per unit, according to United 24 Media, are being manufactured at a rate of about 100 per day. Ukraine can keep on pumping out the drones and sending them in the direction of Moscow, all while maintaining its long-range strategy elsewhere in Russia. That's what we've seen over the past few days. Ukraine sending 250 drones into Moscow delivered a message to Putin. You could say the same about the burning oil depots and terminals in Krasnodar Krai, though taking them out was as much about practicality as it was psychology. Putin knows that Ukraine can hit Krasnodar Krai. It's done it before, and it will do it again. What he doesn't want to accept, but has been made abundantly clear, is that Moscow is now a target. Let's assume that Russia is telling the truth. All 250 of Ukraine's drones were destroyed in the Moscow skies. Even if that's the case, Putin has to be asking himself some questions. How many more drones can Ukraine send? Will Moscow continue to be a target? And if Ukraine keeps on sending drones to Russia's capital, how long will Moscow's air defenses hold out before drones start getting through and remind the city's people that the war that Putin started can hurt them, their country, and their supposedly strongman leader? We'll see if there are any answers to these questions over the coming days. For now, it seems that Ukraine is still sending its drones into Moscow, and each explosion, be that in the skies or on the ground, will lead to the average Russian wondering why, after 4 years of fighting, their supposedly powerful leader has still failed to put down a country that he's claimed many times over is on the verge of defeat. And it may all be about to get a whole lot worse for Russia. As Ukraine accelerates its aerial strategy and starts targeting Moscow, the US is completing testing on a weapon that could take Ukraine's deep strikes to the next level. The rusty dagger is almost ready to be plunged into Putin's throat, and you can find out all about it in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed to the Military Show to see more of our analysis of Ukraine's latest strikes. And thank you, as always, for watching.